We're really compelled by murder, but we're really put off by death. It seems a bit weird, right? You can't have one without the other.
For 22 years, you worked as a forensic scientist in New Zealand, quietly documenting some of the most violent moments in people's lives. You worked on more than 160 homicide investigations across Aotearoa and many more serious crimes, trying to answer the same question every time. What happened here?
A lot of the time, I force myself to get into the head of the killer. Then I retrace that as if I'm him. That can be a healthy and an unhealthy place to be. And then I went to this scene with this baby death. That one just became really stark. And I was like a normal member of society going and seeing this terrible event. And so it started to flip into seeing my family in these dead people. I was becoming less functional as a person, not as a scientist. And then I kept going to these houses, and you see the state in which so many people live. And there is still pride, there is still care in these little spots, these little oases. And it was heartbreaking, more and more and more. And I couldn't just other them anymore. But the thing that came out of that was actually the most profound thing of my entire career, was it.
This week on Between Two Beers, we talk to Ruben Miller.
Ruben spent 22 years as a forensic scientist in New Zealand, walking into the worst scenes imaginable, gathering evidence and helping to tell the stories of people who couldn't tell them anymore. He worked on over 160 homicide investigations, gang killings, cold cases, family violence. He was in those rooms, so you and I didn't have to be.
In 2023, the toll of it all finally caught up. He left the job after being diagnosed with complex PTSD, and this year released his memoir, The Blood Says Otherwise, about his experiences.
This one is about what it costs to do a job most of us couldn't stomach, the scenes he can't unsee, the way he kept showing up, and what happened when he finally stopped. Ruben is measured, thoughtful, and completely without pretense. It's a remarkable conversation. Content note, this episode deals with themes of violence, trauma, and PTSD, and may not be suitable for all listeners.
This episode of Between Two Beers is brought to you by TAB. Keen for more action on sports and racing? Download the TAB app or visit tab.co.nz to get your bet on. R18, bet responsibly.
Seamus and I are also stoked to now be in partnership and dressed by Barkers. Check out their range at barkersonline.co.nz.
Enjoy.
Ruben Miller, welcome to Between Two Beers.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Really excited to have you. We've just finished reading and listening to your book, The Blood Says Otherwise, which is an incredible account of the reality of the life of a forensic scientist in New Zealand. It's a real roller coaster of a read, part memoir, part scientific manual, part cultural reckoning. But also in it, you publicly acknowledge the mental health toll that contributed to you leaving the front line as a result of what you've seen and experienced. So all that to say, I guess the place to start is how are you doing today in this moment?
In this moment, I am feeling really quite good. I'm a little bit nervous, but in terms of addressing anything that you might have just talked about, I'm in a good place.
Did anything surprise you about revisiting your career on the page? And what was the process of actually bringing the book to life?
Well, its inception was actually, I had a couple of mates who run an improv theatre in Auckland. And I went and did a bit of a workshop with one of them, and because they were going to do like a CSI or crime scene sketch, and they wanted to be versed in the CSI vernacular. And so I had, a good night with them. I had dinner with the two of them, and Mary, my wife, was there. And Wade said, "Oh, you got to write a book. These stories are epic." And I just thought, "Oh, I don't know about that." And I turned to my wife, and she had this big grin on her face, and she was clapping away. And I knew that writing a book was on her bucket list, but all I wanted to do was just avoid my problems, at that point. So that was 2019, and so we tried for a bit. Like I spoke, she scribbled. Well, that's not very kind. She wrote. And we had a few sessions, but she was the one who kept stepping up. I didn't. It wasn't until 2022, I was in a sabbatical to police intelligence. I know that sounds really flash, but what it amounted to at times was going on ride-alongs with Crime Squad. And I know Crime Squad sounds flash too, but basically first responders to any and all major crime that was going on around the sort of South Auckland region. And in the downtime, I was sitting in the bowels of the Manukau police station, and it's all its dust and grime and sleepy detectives and old case files on the shelves. And I thought, wow, this is such a cool place. And I thought, this is what I need. I can start writing again. And so I did. I started those stories, and those stories quickly became something entirely different. Stories are cool, plot is interesting, but we have this we're really compelled by murder, but we're really put off by death. And that sort of seems a bit weird, right? You can't have one without the other. And if we just stay with the murder and the plot, then, what are we missing underneath all that? And so quickly my stories became my experiences. I got called out for having too much interiority by my commissioning editor. And I didn't know what that meant, so I had to look it up. What does interiority means that I'm way too interior. So I'm with my own story about how I'm experiencing whatever I'm going through and my process. So I went real deep because I thought that's what I have to do. It's an exploration. And she said, people actually want to know what's happening at these crime scenes as well in a coherent sort of order. Because I did a lot of digressing and so I put the two together and now the crimes, or the description of the crimes in the crime scenes, they provide, in my opinion, context for actually the stories that lie underneath that, and that's the humanity and the humans, right? And so that's what became really important to me in the book, and I do real justice with that. And I'm one of those humans, but so are a number of perpetrators and victims and their families. And, we have to be careful that we don't keep following these headlines along and not be interested in what lies underneath those. So, that's why I wrote the book.
And how do you feel about retelling those stories now? It's one thing to write them, and it's another thing to be on this situation where you do delve back into it. How do you feel coming into a conversation like today?
I feel okay. I think I need to represent those stories well, and that's to provide the rest of the story. It's not just about titillation and gripping this and gripping that. It's way deeper than that. And the crime takes you to a certain point, and then the rest of the story really starts. At least it does for me. But to tell those stories now feels good. And people seem interested. So I have to be careful, though, what sort of message I deliver, I think, around that.
We're going to talk about what's in the book, and there's some really horrific stuff in there. Like some stuff which is really hard to read. It's important, but it's hard. How does your relationship with your memories of that stuff look like now?
It's probably better than it was. I mean, the book, writing the book itself brought a lot out and sort of filled in a lot of gaps. And, there's some really overt versions of that throughout the book as well, and getting help sort of really helped that as well. But, my memory isn't complete and I have gaps. And, to the point where, when people knew I was writing the book, they said, oh, yeah, what about that in that scene? That would be epic if you spoke about that or wrote about that. And I didn't actually, to be honest, know what they were talking about. And, and I said, look, I haven't discussed this with you. This is quite important. There's sensitive issues and confidentiality for me. And they said, no, you were all over the news about it and we could all read about it. And I thought, okay. So I did. So a little bit started coming back, did a bit of research, and it's like, yeah, that's a case from 13 years ago that I did. And it all came flooding back accurately. And, that contrasts really strongly with memories of the most intricate detail from more than 2 decades ago. The tiniest bloodstain, exactly where it was. I could probably draw that scene now and it would be accurate.
I was thinking about this before you arrived, but when you walk into a new environment like this, given your 22 years in the field, do you start to look and assess at different things that are in
stain on Shay's shirt
that are in the room? Yeah, I was quite conscious about those little things. But is it something that is just turned on all the time, or have you turned it off?
I could give a an interesting answer to this, but I
couldn't get
there's a version of me not being on the clock, and then my observation skills go down the toilet.
Right, a little bit like Steve.
Yeah. My wife is constantly like, "How could you have done this job? Like, look at this shit around the place. Are you noticing anything?" And I think it's maybe
me and Mary can get on quite well, actually.
there's both a conscious and a subconscious sort of just shutting off a little bit. But having said that, I am much more observant around small details through the job. It's probably that I don't really mind them so much, and it's the stuff up until recently that would have actually been more of a trigger, sort of like I'm seeing that in the environment. Oh shit, what does that remind me of? This lovely drive to Hamilton today. I drove past 5 houses off these main roads. I can point to homicide there, sexual assault there, kidnapping over there, and I can do that now with a bit of, oh, that's interesting. A few years ago, it wasn't quite that easy.
We've touched on some heavy themes, and there's more to come, but there's also a degree of uniqueness attached to your line of work. And it leads nicely into our Get to Know Ruben segment, provided to us by your good mate, Roger. So Roger told us that back in your environmental science and research days, one of the machines used to test semen samples had to be calibrated using fresh semen, which is obviously not something you can buy at the supermarket. And apparently, when the lab needed someone to help with calibration, you were always first man on the scene. So I wanted to ask you about this. Was this your way of giving back, or was it more of a work perk?
Oh, what was it? No one else was volunteering.
No one's putting their hand up.
There was one. Yeah, it was like whenever it was put out, it was like it was an awkward question as well. It was like it was put out at a team meeting. Hey, we're running a little bit low on the semen control samples, and
Yep.
yeah, and no one did that. No one put their hand up. But it was like a little email later on. It's like, I'm okay with it, and so it was one of those ones. But
is it sheepish glances as you come back into the lab afterwards, or is it anonymous? No worry, guys, we've got an anonymous donation again.
Originally, yes, in the initial stages, but then it became. I think I was I definitely punched above my weight in terms of contribution. So, and I think it became clear that I was the in-house, contributor. And it's one of those awkward things, amongst my colleagues, we used to talk about, we used to say vaginal secretions and talk about various aspects of male and female genitalia like it was, just normal work talk, but then when it comes to something like this, it's like, we're not going to talk about that.
Yeah.
And, we're scientists, but scientists get embarrassed as well.
I think we've spoken about all those things on this podcast too.
Yeah. It's usually a Monday morning whip. We cover off most of those things.
Okay, so slightly related, black light on a hotel room mattress. How bad is that?
Probably depends on the quality of the hotel, but I would say your average mattress in a hotel, and indeed your backseat of a taxi, it's probably best that you don't know. And it's not going to just be one source; it's going to be many. Yeah.
I'm asking this for my colleague. What's the best way to get that out?
Well, semen is water soluble, so just go hard out with that water.
Right, just drown it.
Just drown it.
Okay.
To the point where it becomes what do we say in the industry? No longer detectable. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Flood it. There you go, Steve. Just got to drench the mattress.
And are there any surfaces at home that if you shined I don't know if a black light is the right term on, you'd be shocked?
Doesn't have to be semen.
My home or one's home?
One's home.
In general.
I would say no. You have to be. My data set is made up of at times a certain type of home. It's not necessarily every run-of-the-day mill home. So I might be skewed in my data there. But I would say, and you do keep mentioning black light. I don't actually know what a black light is. I mean, it's something that we don't use in the industry. You're probably meaning like a multiple wavelength light,
black light.
Notoriously unreliable, false positives and false negatives. Yeah. So we use a chemical technique, which is much more reliable. But I would say in your average home, you're probably okay.
Fridge door is generally quite a grubby, by all accounts, quite a grubby one.
Yeah. I mean, it's like your shopping trolley handle, right? Yeah. I mean, if you're talking about general grime,
let's go there.
Yeah.
Let's leave semen alone for a minute.
I don't generally, it's not one of we go for the three major body fluids, it seems, blood, semen, saliva, and grime is sort
I
of.
always thought hair was higher on the list.
No, hairs are interesting. I mean, they don't actually have DNA in the root themselves. So when you pull a hair out actively, it pulls some of those the sheath material that has the DNA in it. But hairs get everywhere, and I got to say, once if you get down low on your average bathroom floor,
not the Holloway house,
you got this population of pubes. So we have to be careful with certain types of evidence, like say a classic pubic hair. It doesn't necessarily always mean what you think it does. Even if it winds up in your undies and it's not yours.
They do get everywhere. They do. Yeah.
Right. For listeners that are this far through the episode, some people skip the intro. So I'm going to just kind of like frame you a little bit for those that don't know. For 22 years, you worked as a forensic scientist in New Zealand, quietly documenting some of the most violent moments in people's lives, bedrooms, backyards, kitchens. You worked on more than 160 homicide investigations across Aotearoa and many more serious crimes, trying to answer the same question every time: what happened here? But the deeper story in your book isn't the crimes, it's the cost of witnessing them. So today we want to understand the science and the stories and the psychology and what it does to a person to spend a career inside the aftermath of violence. But in order to do that, we need to understand a bit more about who you are first. And it's been quite an interesting path, because before forensics, you were a special effect makeup artist in the Netherlands. Tell us about that path and making fake blood.
When I was a kid, I wanted to do two things. One is making monsters for movies, and the other one was being a detective. So I'm quite lucky I've got to fulfill both those paths. But, after school, the last thing I wanted to do was study or do anything academic. So we immigrated from Holland when I was quite young. And so I had a bit of a base there. And within a couple of months, I was fluent in Dutch because I'd always heard it at home. And so I did a special effects makeup course there. And it was weird, like in Europe and particularly Germany at the time, zombie splatter effects seemed to be genre du jour amongst sort of low-budget young filmmakers. So I had a glorious time chucking around, fake blood and guts, learning the craft and just growing up a bit. That was awesome. It was such a fantastic experience. And, when I came back to New Zealand a couple of years later, I sort of came back down to earth a little bit. And the makeup industry then was, you'd do 18, 20-hour days, just be exhausted, and in 3 months you'd have no work. And I did miss having gone to university because I was academically quite good at school as well. So I put all my eggs in one basket and I thought, okay, sweet, I'm going to go and do a biology degree because I'd always liked animals. That classic one. Whatever it was kind of like I need to do science. I need to do something cool, and then I quickly realized, holy shit, I'm going to be sitting in a lab for the rest of my life with a pipette and a couple of test tubes, and I said, oh Christ! So I heard about this forensics master's program that had just been introduced to Auckland University. I thought that's it, because where there's forensics, there's crime scenes. And crime scenes don't require me to sit in a lab. And it's that other fantasy I had as a kid. It was, but I can put science into it, and this is perfect. So that's how it went from sort of makeup special effects to crime scenes or real blood and guts. I thought, who's going to be better prepared than me? I've made bodies, surely I can just hang around with them. Yeah. But it's not exactly how it all went.
No, it's not. To sort of skip forward a little bit in the story, I mean, when you picture a forensic scientist, I think you imagine someone with quite a strong stomach. Well, I certainly do. But you nearly fainted in the morgue before your career had even started. So how did the guy who couldn't handle that room become the guy that walked into 160 homicide scenes?
Yeah, there was a lot of bravado. I I went into that sort of, if we skip forward 5 years from starting the MSc in forensic science, I thought, I've got an upper hand here, and it's competitive. There were other students in the same place as me, like 5 that were at ESR at the time. We were going to be vying for those same jobs, the few that came along, or maybe even one that year. So I thought, we got to test our resolve, because we're going to be seeing bodies. And where do you go and see a body? It's like, but I thought, I've got a massive advantage here. They don't know that I've had this previous career. And so it was really like, I'll test their resolve, because I'll be sweet. And so I co-organized a trip for the 5 of us to the morgue for a bit of depraved show and tell, I guess you would say. Yeah, so I thought, who's going to be better placed to sail through this experience than me? And well, it turned out that all of the rest of them were better placed. And when that scalpel came out and penetrated the skin of that poor guy who was lying there, the room really started spinning, and I just thought, man, that's very quickly. It was like, wow, this is bad, and my career's probably going to go all in the span of a few seconds. And then I just had this pathetic little voice that came out of me, and I said it to the pathologist at the time, and she goes, and I just said, can we just stop a minute? And she just looked at me and she said, she must have thought, here's another fainter or whatever. So I think it was maybe to protect the environment and maybe the guy that she was working on to, get me out of there and not be a liability. But yeah, I got taken up to the offices there and by the technician, and I just sat there in my shame, and just waited for those, what I like to think of as sociopaths, to sail through that grisly experience. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to put another plan in place. I'm still going to be the nation's preeminent forensic scientist, but I'm going to do it in a different way. And that's just soldiering on, because there's no way I was going to stop, I mean, this was what I've been telling people I was going to do for ages. I had the coolest job at the party, sort of, and it wasn't going to finish because of that little incident. And I didn't take any notice of it, and just.
So you've left the room and you're sitting by yourself, and you describe it brilliantly in the book as well about how that happened. But did you have any concerns that might impact you down the line? Is this part of the official I become a forensic technician test?
It wasn't part of the training program, and I was a student at that time writing my thesis. So this was in anticipation of the job that would come up that we would all be sparring for, and so it was a little more informal than that. I of course I sat there going, holy crap, more sort of doubt that I had in myself initially. But then, there's always that paranoia. It's like, oh, what if this story gets out? How am I going to get shafted? Maybe rightly so, because I did have a strong reaction to it. But I was in a different department. Where comms the best, I don't know. But the interviewing scientist, when I finally went for the job, I don't think had an idea of my quote unquote failure at the time.
Is it as easy as ringing the morgue and saying there's 5 of us want to come in, and it's like the scene from the Goonies, or was it the Goonies or Stand By Me? You guys want to go and see a dead body?
It was pretty much. It was the only place that I knew had bodies. So I thought, well, why not have a phone call? And we had to get a sort of like a supervisor to sign off on it, and on our time and all that sort of stuff. And so there was a bit of an official record. But for the rest, I think this wasn't uncommon. I thought it was, but this idea of a show and tell at the morgue seems pretty weird, but you have trainee doctors, surgeons, would-be forensic pathologists who probably need to do this all the time. So for them, it wasn't a strange thing at all.
Was a true crime genre around at that? Were there parallels between that fictional life and that real life that you? It
wasn't true crime like it is now. It seems like everyone's just gagging for a bit of murder hit. There was CSI was at its height. We had Miami and.
Did you do the glasses with the
Absolutely. At every opportunity I could. Anything for a bit of a distraction, right? A bit of levity.
Horatio Caine, is it?
Horatio Caine, yeah. He was an interesting dude. He solved crimes with those glasses. Yeah.
So it didn't stall you. You did continue sort of pushing forward. Was there another time when you did the same thing and you didn't faint? Like,
I made it a bit of a mission to not go to the morgue if I didn't need to. I didn't. Right throughout, actually, when I was dealing with a body or at a crime scene, I just wanted to be busy. And that's when I was at my best. So most of the time, there wasn't sort of those feelings didn't come up in the same way because I wasn't just standing there watching, this sort of voyeur or, that's where I feel really uncomfortable. So I go to the morgue when I can be really useful, and that's to assist the pathologist with collecting physical or biological evidence from the body. And then it's okay. It's not great, but it's okay. So there wasn't a similar experience throughout my entire career. That was quite unique, actually.
Is there an exam or anything that you need to pass to become a forensic technician initially?
Yeah, absolutely. There's
anyone can just.
Well, yeah. Actually, as the words were coming out of my mouth, I was like, "This is a stupid question." But
you just apply for it, and then you won.
Yeah. It's like just that you want the job and you can sail through a morgue test is fine.
Like a license, or
there's a rigorous training program, and
right.
there's exams for like every module that you do, whether it's a semen screening module or a blood finding module or whatever it is. And every year you have to sit a number of exams, international sort of accreditation stuff to show that you're still competent, so there's no chance to just get too slack or relaxed.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That was a good question.
Was it?
Exceptional.
So in 2021, you start as a forensic technician and work your way up to become a scientist. And we're really keen to understand what the job actually looks like. So walk us through what a scene call out actually feels like from the phone ringing at whatever hour to stepping under the tape to what are the rituals and how does it work?
So back in 2001, we didn't have cell phones. We had pagers. So this is like a little shrieky alarm from So then you had to go and find a phone and call. And this the weirdest, by and large, it's not those calls at 2 a.m. Like the cops will often shut down a scene and wait till a respectable hour and then call you then. But when I was a technician, you get called by the scientist because the scientist is the one that holds the phone that can be contacted by the police. So the scientist sort of works through things and makes them easy for them, but hasn't necessarily considered you entirely in the process. So in my very first scene call out, I did get quite an early phone call on my Monday morning, my first day, and it was a homicide.
Oh, good.
I didn't sleep much that night, because I was anticipating, and I probably fell asleep, at 3 a.m, and then had an hour's sleep before the thing went off. That pager going off and stumbling around trying to find a phone. When you've just had that hour's sleep, and that hour's sleep is the worst, you have no idea where the hell you are. And now I've got someone on the other end of the line who really expects a lot of me, at least to understand the basics of what he's saying. And it's basically get to work. That's the message I took. And I knew that there was a body in the bush somewhere down the line. And so I went, I skipped breakfast. I wanted to make a great impression. I went there early, and it's basically on me then to pack the car or the truck that we had, at that stage, with everything that we could use. So, all the different kits and the personal protective equipment, blah, 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 trying to anticipate everything. And then, it's this sort of, especially with these types of scenes where they're quite far away from Auckland, it's this protracted drive and trying to make conversation early in the morning.
On your first day as well?
Yeah, that was my very first day of my very first on-call with someone I hadn't really dealt with in training much, And so it was kind of all brand new. And that experience at the morgue was sort of looming large in the back of my mind. But no, I'll put it away. Don't worry about it. And so it's, it's the inane chat in the car. Do we talk about work? Do we talk about what, And you find a bit of a rhythm. But then it's these decisions that people don't sort of realize. It's like, well, where do we stop for food? Can I say I need a wee now? Because you might not need a wee, but I've been holding it up the whole time, and we're about to be in the bush, and they don't provide portaloos out there, especially not in the Auckland region. In Christchurch, when I've done a few scenes there, they always have a portaloo, and it's
That seems very considerate.
It's really as it should be. But, perfecting that art of reabsorption from the bladder is something that I did a lot because you just couldn't find anywhere. And, so in this case, we did chat about sort of the circumstances as they were sort of understood, or as the police thought they understood it at that point. You have to be really careful about not taking in too much information. You get a bit biased. Oh, that's what we're going to do, because that and that is known. So I spent a bit of time in the car doing that, just prepping ourselves. And then, before you know it, you're at the scene. Back in 2000 and 2001, I was reading a map. So, that was shit because I got car sick all the time. Windy roads. But, great navigator. And then I stopped navigating because I was always car sick, so they let me drive, which was great. And then you arrive at the scene, and it's normally demarcated by several marked and unmarked police cars. And, with a case of a body, you've got one of those blue police gazebos or tents, that X marks the spot sort of thing. And then it's being introduced to the various heads of the investigation. You've got officer in charge of the body, officer in charge of exhibits, officer in charge of the scene. He's sort of coordinating the whole thing. And then you have a scene coordinator. If it's in the city and it's a big deal, you'll have all taped off sections, keeping media and public back. And then you have your first briefing, and which is, again, let's go over the circumstances. What's the plan of attack? All that sort of stuff. And at that stage, early on in my career, it was very much just sort of stand there and listen and sort of pipe up now and then, and you get a sort of a bit of a grumpy gaze from the scientist because you've overstood the boundary, and it's okay, I'll shut up. And then it's all go. But that first scene was, well, what the hell do I do now? And there was a body, and so that was, ooh. And I just got sent into the bush to basically start doing the most basic thing, which is looking. And looking is 90% of what we do. That's our biggest bit of tech. And that's why we go to scenes during the day. We don't tend to go at night with a little torch, as they do on CSI.
What are you looking for?
So what I'm looking for there is there's a principle in forensic science, Edmund Locard. He said, chaque contact les un trait, because he's French. And basically, I think I got that right, I'm not sure, but every contact leaves a trace. So in theory, that's great, so we hold that as our sort of North Star, what has somebody who's been foreign to this area brought into the scene, primarily? But there's also that reconstruction of what happened. So, very overtly, you got drag marks and all that sort of stuff that could pinpoint you to areas of interest at the scene. So in this case, I was looking out for any shoe prints that might be in the earth, in the bush, any signs of other disturbance, but then physical or biological evidence that's been left behind. And in this case, primarily blood. So this guy had been beaten in this case quite severely. And often when people are beaten, they put up a bit of a fight, or they retaliate, or people are injured in the process of actually injuring somebody else. So the gravy, the gold that you can really get as seen is blood left behind by a perpetrator. So we always have our
skin under the fingernails. Isn't that what you're looking for? Of
the classic
of the victims?
Skin under the fingernails. Well, we wouldn't look for that at a scene because that body is there. That so-called skin under the fingernails is there, and that would be processed at the post-mortem. So anything on and around the body that might be disturbed by the body being removed is looked at the scene very carefully. So hairs and fibers that might be on the body, blood stains, say, that are on the body that require context. So, how is the body lying? We use that word in situ a lot. Don't move anything unless you absolutely have to. So the body will be taken care of. The trail leading up to the body that would also necessarily become the trail to take that body out is also looked at very carefully. And then the body is removed as soon as possible. So every hour that you have that body there is slowly deteriorating, and you're losing evidence both within and on top of the body. So to get that body to a morgue and basically on ice or be examined as soon as possible is critical.
You mentioned before about not taking in too many details because you don't want to be biased. Is that a critical part of your role, that you are there objectively just to view what's happened? But do you have to take in some element
Absolutely.
of
It's this fine line between enough information to do your job or effectively, but not too much information that you are led down a bit of a garden path. So you might have a situation where you have what seems like a bit of an open and shut, say domestic homicide. You've got a couple of witnesses there. You've got a confession even, maybe early on. Like it's not a legal confession, but it's, oh no, this and this happened, I did it, and often that's because they've called 111 themselves and admitted it. We have to treat that as a whodunit homicide, because we never know what's going to happen with that story later on. So if we're led too much by those statements that all align, then we may not actually be looking for that other person who could have been in the house as well, because we've ignored foreign DNA and we're just thinking it's just purely a domestic, and that changes what you end up doing. So, yeah, you have to be very disciplined with that idea of almost a blank slate.
But do you have to actively train that with it? Because you're a human.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so hard to not be unduly influenced by context or what you believe to be true, especially when you're seeing the results of what people do to each other. This idea that, oh, that body, it's horrific what's going on here. This desire to hold someone accountable. And, you can turn to the person where it looks most obvious and go, oh, then that's it then. But it's a discipline that I don't think we ever get trained for, but it's something we talk about all the time. So that's a version of training. It's like a team culture where it's all we hold this as sacred.
You write in the book that you're drilled to be ethical machines, which is kind of linked to this, right?
Absolutely.
And it's like you give some examples of who's done it. It would be a lot easier to just write a different name on the sort of the container of what you've found, but you don't do it. But you sort of describe a struggle internally with that decision.
Yeah, this all comes down to pressure and expectations, and the police, in certain situations, you will have a very clear idea of what's gone on, and everything is pointing to that, and you're there as the just in case. And for me, temptation in my head did come along occasionally, but there's a big difference between sort of acting out on that and actually contemplating. A lot of the time I force myself to get into the head of the killer, right? To sort of do my reconstruction. And that can be a healthy and an unhealthy place to be, right?
Yeah.
And that's a whole different thing as well. But when you're occupying all these different perspectives of what could have occurred, certain ones become tempting to try and reinforce or try and establish that is in fact the case. And we get tired and we get sort of, it feels like there's nothing to win here. So let's just go with the easiest path, all that sort of stuff. But, there are ethical obligations that we have to uphold. There are all sorts of testing and quality assurance processes that we go through to try and sort of weed this sort of behavior out. And I've succeeded there in large part, but it hasn't been easy to always get there.
Just to close the loop on that first case that we're sort of going back to, at the end of that day, or was it 2 days or however long you were there, was there a sense of kind of accomplishment, like you've done it, that was a dead body, you went and you collected what you needed to do and sort of job done, or what happens after that?
For me, it was a huge sense of accomplishment because of my previous experience, my only other experience with a dead body. And it was all down to the fact that I was, there was that pressure, because pressure does help as well. You get on with the job. And just really going for it, being responsible, having people had expectations of me, And, I mean, at that scene particularly, I went from, oh, there's a body. I'm quite happy being further into the bush and just sort of, doing my thing over there, and they can take care of that. But, within half an hour, I was back with that body because those signs that I was seeing suddenly started getting my whole forensic brain going. And I wanted to be back with that body because that was the seat of everything that was going on. And, within a couple of hours, I had forceps into the guy's skull, collecting physical evidence out of there. And it was organic. It was, I was on the job, and that for me was a real revelation, given my previous experience. It's like, yeah, I can do this. And, it filled me up massively. So there was that mini celebration, and I thought, well, I can, maybe this is all going to be fine.
Well, that was day one. What was day two?
Day two in the bush, you mean?
Well, day two on the job, day one is a homicide.
Day two on the job was another scene.
Right.
Yeah, wow. So it wasn't a homicide. It was, I believe it was a sexual assault in Auckland. So it was a whole different thing. But yeah, I mean, day two started with me sort of, again, not getting much sleep because of everything that I was sort of experiencing, being happy about it and having a bit of sort of, I got this, And day two started like, just going to work. But the thing is that everyone was talking about the details of the scene, the sort of the process and the nitty gritty and the science of it all, so that's what we were focused on. And there wasn't really an interest generally around what else might there have been? Like, how did you feel actually being with the body? And I certainly wasn't interested in myself because I was just so relieved. And so it's like, okay, let's just set that aside. And it's like, that's not relevant at all.
Are there days when you were on call and nothing happened and you just stayed at the lab?
Yeah, so that's the other side of my job. I say that I went into this job because, it got me out of a lab, but the biggest part of our job is being in the lab. So, after a scene, particularly if the police carry on with the investigation, will be at times a protracted year-long set of examinations within the lab. So, clothing from the suspect and the victim, weapons that come in, all that sort of stuff. So we're looking for body fluids, we're looking for trace evidence, we're looking for physical evidence. That's all lab-based work where it can be nice and sterile, it can be controlled, contained, and that's a gathering evidence process for all those samples to go off to the various analytical labs for the deeper dive into the analytics, whether that's DNA, drugs, physical evidence, and that's all compiled later on.
So quite different to what you might see on a TV show. Can you tell us about the CSI effect?
Yeah, so CSI effect, I guess it goes around perceptions. Some of that comes out of the media. Some of that comes from shows that we see. The CSI effect is basically what people think forensic science can do or achieve, and then that feeding back at times into the system itself. So, it ends up affecting, public's perception ends up affecting what happens during trial at times, in an extreme sense. And it can also affect sort of how we work at scenes sometimes. So, there's a public expectation that we might be doing X. So we potentially sometimes add to what we would normally do for the just in case or the perception of things. It doesn't necessarily go anywhere, but it sort of expands the possibilities. The CSI effect is generally, I think, pretty unhealthy. And it glamorizes forensic science and what detectives can do, and this idea that we can get DNA results in a minute, everything's conclusive, and that cases are just wrapped up perfectly each time, and it's very clear, very black and white, and the reality just isn't that at all.
Mm. Does that do more harm than good for your particular role? The fact that there is this perception of what you do versus the reality of it and the expectation from public to get a result so quickly?
I think, scientists are sort of quite an insular bunch, and sort of we do our thing and sort of most of us don't really care. So we just sort of get on with it, and we're set to the side of the police as well. So police probably have their own pressures. And so we're sort of in a bit of a bubble and we're sort of all aware of it, but it doesn't actually affect things too much. But just occasionally it raises its head, when there's sort of media interest, aspects of trial, and, you're talking to jurors generally, when you're, giving evidence. And I can walk into a trial, courtroom, and I'm about to give evidence, and I've got sort of there's foreshadowing sometimes, or like, it's the CSI, it's the forensic scientist.
Here comes the slam dunk.
Shit just got real, yeah, and people are expecting a slam dunk as well, and scientists drive people nuts because they just sit on the fence a lot, just hedging their bets. I can't quite say it's consistent with, or I can't exclude the possibility that, all that junk that sort of, we're doing that to protect our integrity and interpretation and conclusions, but it comes across like, well, what do I do with this stuff? So I think, and those jurors are expecting something big, and DNA isn't always helpful, but it's expected that you've got a big murder case, DNA should be present, because otherwise, what are you guys doing? Did you screw up?
You become a forensic technician, then you become a forensic scientist, and you're on the cases and you're dealing with real dead bodies. And this, you do it for over 20 years. In those initial years, so I'm thinking like 5 years in, how are you talking about your job? I imagine when you go to a barbecue or you're hanging out with mates, like, is everyone asking you questions, and how much information are you giving them about what you're actually seeing?
I did get quite a lot of attention, sort of that. I don't know if I mentioned it before, that competition, who's got the best job at the party. And I think I was probably the only one playing, but I always won, which was important, right?
Did your reputation precede you? If you were coming to a barbecue, did people go, oh, here comes CSI?
Occasionally, yes. And also when they found out, there was always questions. Everyone's an expert. Everyone's got their reckons, especially if it's a big case. Oh, so what do you reckon about X and X? And it's like, I don't actually know, because I didn't work on the case. And if I did work on the case, the last thing I would do is actually start spilling the beans, because that's probably really unethical. So there was that. It was just sort of measuring sort of how much can I talk about, and most of the time it wasn't much, but I could talk generally about how the job was. And in those first 5 years, it was sort of, that was the height of, this is exciting, and I've got a cool job, and, I can't wait to see where this goes, and all that sort of stuff. And it's only when, I think I was at one party where there were like 3 stand-up comedians once, and that's when I really lost. And it's like, well, what about me? I'm the forensic scientist, man. These funny guys. So that was that. For the rest, it's people have always been interested. They we get so caught up in, like Bain was a classic example, where it's like everyone had their 2 cents worth, and it's like they were really, really dedicated almost to the cause of, nah, he's guilty, or nah, he's innocent. And they would sort of, well, this guy can lend some credibility to that. And it's like, well, I'm not going to, stay with your reckons.
Was it the same? Grace Mullane, I know you weren't involved in the case. Was that was the most high profile one that comes to mind?
Absolutely.
Where the whole country was talking about it? Yeah. Was that every conversation that you were in, people wanting to ask you about it?
Yep, yeah, absolutely. And, Polkinghorne more recently, it was these big cases that resemble more closely the detective novels that we read, or the idea, it fulfills the idea of what crime should be, and you've got very clear victims, you got very clear suspects, and it just made it easy and sort of palatable, and people could follow their stories along, and you could hate on someone, or you could find this so tragic, and they were more like the people that we would expect in more in fictional crime to behave and appear, and so those ones were always top of the list.
I want to spend some time in some specific cases with the understanding that you'll sort of tell us where the line is. And can we start in 2010, which was 9 years into your work, and it involved the death of 2-year-old Anna Sanger. You were searching a house and you lifted the lid of a washing machine, and you've written that you're still to this day processing what you saw. I'm hoping that you can share like what you want people to understand about that moment, and perhaps give us any detail you're prepared to share.
I think why I wrote about that story is sort of a little bit like what I said at the beginning, which is we've got so accustomed to murder, but not to the death part of that. And true crime is actually incredibly brutal and very basic and really horrific. And the way I've described it in the book is a very short description of a particular part of her appearance. Later on, when I talk about, it's sort of like a summary of the case and the circumstances and her injuries. That's a compilation from news articles. So it's already in the news. It's been talked about, and it feels really natural and normal to have those details out there. But when it's put in context of somebody discovering that, and if you've followed along my sort of slightly clunky journey in the book, people's responses to that chapter has been, wow, that was so difficult to read. And it was difficult to write. And it should be difficult to read because it's absolutely tragic. So in a sense, it's a resensitization to the tragedy of death in amongst cool science, detective work, and sleuthing. And sort of those two, I think, really need to stay together for them to be meaningful. Otherwise, we're sort of just glossing over one and ignoring the other entirely.
I want to talk about how it affected you, but is it okay for you to explain the scene and what you saw?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So the scene was initially a death of a young mother in Tauranga in Otumotai. And she had been discovered dead on the floor of a laundry that was partially inside the garage. And she'd obviously been, at least the first appearance was that she'd been stabbed a number of times. She was lying on her stomach. And there was blood. I say blood everywhere, but it was one of the most blood-stained scenes I've seen, where you've got different patterns from liberation of blood droplets from various injuries that just grossly overlap each other. So it's almost uninterpretable. So you have to look at those edges, sort of what's going on the ceiling or maybe across the room that would give some better indication of what actually went down. So the information we had was that a previous boarder of the family had admitted to a friend that he had killed a family and he was seeking refuge with his friend. So we knew that Dev Sangha, who was the father, was out of the country on business. So it just left the two of them because she had a young daughter, a 2-year-old. And so we basically went into a slightly different mode to what I would normally be used to, which is examining everywhere in the house where you might be able to find or conceal a 2-year-old. So it was a long process of almost like, treading two different paths, which is one, this importance of finding this girl, but also acknowledging that this was a crime scene and adhering to certain protocols. So, it was an unusual job, and it was kind of a little bit scary. It's like, what am I going to find? And we found nothing. So the idea was that, he's potentially taken her somewhere, or sort of, could she be alive or not? We don't know. So we carried on with the examination. So I was basically standing in that laundry for a few hours, documenting everything. And when I say documenting, it's literally drawing on, at that stage we just had clipboards, drawing on paper and backing that up with photographs, putting my interpretations there after, piecing together my findings, taking relevant samples and so on. And just to the left of me was a washing machine that I hadn't properly looked at yet. And it had blood on many parts of it, on the side and on the top. And what we stay really interested in is, disruptions and patterns that indicate that something may have changed. So, and there was definitely a change in the blood staining between the side of the washing machine and the lid on the top loader that would have been, able to be opened. So I thought, at some stage I've got to examine that, carried on. And then it came to the washing machine, and to see if there was any blood staining on the inside of the lid of the washing machine, I opened it up. And I just remember looking in and just seeing Anna Sangha, the 2-year-old, just sort of staring straight back at me. And it did seem like a stare. it was, that mystery had been solved at that point. Where was the girl? And yeah, I just froze, closed the washing machine lid, and then went and told the detective. And in one sense, it was like a bit of relief because we had an answer to the question. But then I thought, I'm feeling really strange about this. And it's been a number of years since I started this job. And the shock just sort of pushed past the threshold where I couldn't ignore it. So I just asked to take a 15-minute break, and I just sort of sat there on my own while the detectives, confirmed that it was Anna, and sort of, relayed that to their superiors, I guess. And then, 15 minutes expired, and I thought, okay, sweet, get on with the job. And so I don't know that there was a lot of processing happening at all, or in the rest of the scene. There was a lot of work to do. That one carried on for 2 days. We did a lot of luminol work, which is finding glowing blood at night, following the perpetrator's trails and so on as he did what he did in the house. But it was, it's like that image is still with me, but it doesn't affect me in the same way that it used to. So it's now a terrible thing that happened and that I witnessed, but it doesn't drag me into a different world where it's incredibly unsettling and all pervasive.
The other element of that is that your son was 2 years old at the time, and Anna was 2. Mm. I can't even imagine putting those two things together and seeing that. But is that going through your head at the time? Like, can you separate the family from the work, and when you're seeing something like that, which is so close to home?
I thought I could, and I think I had done an okay job of that over the years, and no, I couldn't also separate it. Especially going home and seeing my family. But it was this: I've got to keep those two worlds entirely separate. And so when I went to work, I was in work mode and everything that came with it, and the expectation that I could see this stuff. And I almost became a totally different person when I went home. But you can't actually, that's still with you, right? It's sitting in there somewhere. And I think what it was doing was just festering away. And I think it's, when you really think about death quite deeply, and that we're all going to die, and this idea that, your parents are going to die, all those things that you had as a kid, it's almost like you stop at a certain point because it's actually too traumatic to think about. And I think my body just stopped me from going too far because it was just too much. When I think about actually that death in the washing machine and what her last moments were like, it's just like, well, how deep can you go into that, and come out slightly functional? So just don't go deep and just let's go surface.
But did you have strategies or rituals or things that you did to allow yourself to divorce the work version of yourself from the home version? Is it something on a drive home?
I don't think so. There weren't conscious strategies. I think it was.
I'm in the car.
Yeah, I've got these habits that I've just built up, and they're survival habits, and they're not necessarily that great for the rest of my life, but they're working in this job, and so I just build on those habits. Just keep going because it sort of worked, So let's do the same thing. But again, it wasn't conscious. It was just, and I think there was also that bravado around it. Like, I'm not being affected, because look at me. I'm still jovial. I'm still got this energy. I'm still great at life, All that's crap.
I'm glad you said it because I'm sitting here as well. And I'm also thinking, before about, we talked about having to be, quite narrow in your approach to it, emotion-wise. But surely there's an element of you that boils over with anger or something about what has happened.
Yeah.
Because I read it and that I have that reaction in me as someone who's learning about it third hand.
There was definitely, yes, did I feel angry? I think that by that stage I'd seen so much already, and then it was like a build on each other. It's like, I've seen this guy in the bush who's dead. Felt quite different to seeing Anna in the washing machine. I've seen the results of this and that rape there, that gang killing there. And it's just, it's almost like they kept mounting up on each other. So my tweaks to dealing with it didn't have to be that big. You know, it was kind of like felt like you know, with that thing about frogs in hot water, it's sort of like the slow boil. You just don't actually realize it's happening until you're actually fully boiling. And I mean, that was kind of my career in a way. But my anger and frustration definitely spilled over in different ways. You know, it's like, nah, I'm not going to bring that home. But yeah, of course I brought that home, you know, and I was these were situations I couldn't control. They were totally out of my control, what people do to each other. So what could I do? I could exert some control at home. You know, things aren't working for me. I'm going to have controlling behavior. I'm going to be irritable. I'm going to be unreasonable. You know, I think that's mostly how I would have been perceived when I wasn't in a great place. But then I had a lot of time on my own as well. And there was a lot of stewing and rumination around it. But again, I just almost couldn't deal with it. So I ruminated to a point, and then it was like, oh, I should go for a swim egg or a surf, or, you know, and that will all make it all better.
Man, it's such a tornado of emotions and feelings, because on the one of the big breakthroughs in the case was finding 2 tiny drops of blood on the glasses of the killer, which you spent an incredible amount of time sort of figuring out. So there's this horror and all these emotions that we've just described, but then on the other hand, you can help find the killer. So there's this kind
perpetrator, killer. What are we allowed to say?
He killed her, so he's a killer.
He's a killer, right?
He perpetrated the deed, so he's a perpetrator.
Right.
We can say that officially now because it's, you know, it's gone to trial. It's, you know, everything's happened.
But then there's this sort of satisfaction, I'm guessing, of doing your job well, and actually, like, that is where the fulfilling part comes from.
Totally, and that's also a coping mechanism, right? So, so some of these cases, particularly the ones that appear in the book, are both incredibly tragic and at the same time incredibly fulfilling. And sort of, it's weird to put those two things together. But one of those things is the social difference or good or whatever we call it, that the job can actually give, you know, that yes, we do have evidence now, hard evidence that this guy did what we thought he did, you know. A confession wasn't to a mate is not really enough, you know. But holding those two things together is quite difficult. But that's what I signed up for. The job was to find these things out via science, you know, and it's an incredible revelation where, you know, I've basically reconstructed and mapped this guy's entire movements through the house. And I know that in his actions, he would have been exposed, the perpetrator would have been exposed to minute droplets of blood through the air that have been liberated from an impact event. At least one, but probably multiple. So he's going to have these tiny little spots of blood on him that can only be explained through very limited ways. It's not just passively going to a body and checking if someone's all right, or, you know, getting a bit of blood on yourself. That looks so different. So that idea that, you know, his clothes have been taken care of after the fact, but he neglected to either properly clean or acknowledge his prescription glasses, which seems like a probably very human act to sort of, you know, miss out something. And then to find those very, very small spots of blood on the side of a pair of glasses that wouldn't have been visible to him, but could only really mean one thing, was this moment of hell yes. You know, that was not because it led to him, but because science was able to determine something bordering on conclusive.
Is that you getting into the mind of a killer?
There's evidence throughout the house, visual evidence of where he went, what he did. And it was one of the clearest cases I've ever done. And so then I retrace that as if I'm him and just think, what else would I have done? You know, how would I have gone about cleaning myself up? You know, where would I have gotten undressed? What would I have put back on? And what might I have missed? So and there are all sorts of possibilities there. So I test all of those, and, you know, and then, you know, the evidence speaks for itself in some cases.
This is so fascinating. Like, I'm so in here. There's two things at once, right? There's what you've just explained of how you're solving cases, and then there's the human toll. And I understand there's mandatory therapy, right? Like your first body, your first child, your first multiple bodies. What is those? Because we're going to talk more about the therapy later, but in those initial therapy sessions, when you're talking about this, what are you getting out of it and how are you approaching it?
I think I'm getting exactly what I put in. I think, I imagine that therapists who encounter frontline workers all the time, I'm not saying they don't do their best, but there's a predictable set of questions you might ask, and not all of us are very willing to really go there. And I certainly wasn't initially. And so the way it goes is that I sort of feel like I'm showing up and I should do this for the therapist. So the last thing I'm doing is being curious or interested in me and sort of what might be coming up, and let's explore that, shall we? So that's how therapy often looked for me initially. And, we call it a critical incident debrief. And so, and I look back and well, I'd like it to have been therapy, but a lot of that's on me, right? To sort of actually bring myself to the game and try and work on myself. But for me, it was a huge bit about, that's not what strong people do. We don't need help, it's, and that's what I fundamentally believed at that point, that this stuff, one, isn't affecting me because I wasn't curious enough about what was going on for me. And two, even if it was, I probably shouldn't be interested in that, and I'll just get through it and I'll just tick this box.
Was that timing of what the world was like at that stage?
I think that's true all the time, right? So, there's always more that every industry can do. And as research comes out around chronic exposure and sort of team culture and leadership and all that sort of stuff, there's more and more layers that can and do get added to the help that's out there. And, when you're talking about, early 2000s, it was sign of the times.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that bravado, that resilience, the get on with it, someone's got to do the job stuff still, in my experience, still very much exists at the front lines, regardless of what profession you're actually looking at.
I think this leads nicely into what we've termed the overlap. And it was a passage in the book that stopped me when I read it, and I want to read it back to you. You say, "My son was 2 years old when I found 2-year-old Anna Sanger in a washing machine in 2010. My daughter was 9 years old when I examined a 10-year-old girl's bedroom in Flatbush after she had been sexually assaulted by an intruder. She was 16 years old when I examined a lonely cul-de-sac where the body of 16-year-old Trinity Oliver had been dumped. My wife was every adult female homicide victim I've spent countless hours examining. I had to deaden myself in order to function during those experiences. Children's clothing, toys, furnishings, bathroom products, books, games, tools, plants, food products. I've seen the same ones at home that I've seen at crime scenes. Things hit too close to home. There is a disturbing familiarity in shared items that seem inconsequential, and with them, another connection to a different world is established. I have fought the idea of accepting a connection to keep my world safe from theirs. Their world doesn't exist. It's not real. The worlds are not so different, and that notion is unsettling." That's an incredibly powerful passage. Can you tell us about that overlap and what you're saying there?
This reflection comes, in the latter part of my career, that, at the time, finding Anna in the washing machine was hard, but I was so good at keeping the world separate that my son wasn't Anna, but my son was Anna in my last 5 years. All those memories were very evocative and very easy to access. And I looked at him and then thought about her, even when he's a lot older, and just thought, and then it became really difficult around what would that have been like for him. And I can access it slowly because I building these deep relationships with these kids. I just think someone isn't able to have that relationship with either his wife or his 2-year-old anymore. and the total tragedy of that. But the further I went with that and being interested in myself and those connections and life of others, especially in these circumstances, my coping techniques sort of started to erode, and, survival and habits and curiosity were at real odds with each other. And so it started to flip into seeing my family in these dead people. And then, it was just getting so close to home, becoming much harder. I was becoming less functional as a person, not as a scientist. I was still at the top of my game. And then those connections that went beyond that, which were those little things that you talk about, which was almost more profound than any one body. It's like, holy crap, I've kept these people away and what they do to each other for so long. And I'm the same as them. This othering that I had done to keep it all safe and sanitary and easy, calling them evil people, whatever it was. I mean, I had murmurings of questioning that early on in my career, but I wasn't interested enough in that initially. And it just became really hard to keep othering them. And I was having frustrations in my life. I was having difficulties. And then I kept going to these houses, and you see the state in which so many people live. And there is still pride. There is still care in these little spots, these little oases. And it was heartbreaking, more and more and more. And I couldn't just other them anymore. But the thing that came out of that was actually the most profound thing of my entire career, was a deep compassion for the way people go about their lives with the causes and conditions, the resources that they have. It's been so massive for me to understand that. And that actually, if I'd grown up in that, I would have done exactly the same thing. And so my compassion is sort of spilled out from almost the worst. If you can find compassion for a killer, who can you not find compassion for? So I've got so much more time for everyone now, because it's like, shit, everyone's got a story. We're all just ordinary, and we're not just the worst thing we've done. I mean, some people have really pushed that theory for me, and I haven't resolved it, but the vast majority I can understand. I can't condone, but I can understand.
And what you're describing it's not an avalanche, is it? It's a real slow burn
massively.
over time.
Oh, huge. It took exposure to so much for me to get there. Again, I did have sort of very unformed questions initially. It's like, this is clashing with my idea of what bad people are like, and it's like, I need to explore this a bit. And either I suppressed it or my other experiences just suppressed it just to get on with stuff. But it came to a point, it would have been a good 15 years, where I just couldn't ignore that anymore. And it was like, man, I have judged the hell out of people,
You used the term before about willing to go there, with a therapist. But what made you willing to go there to explore that curiosity? Was there a moment or a case?
It definitely wasn't a moment or a case. It was, I think it was a slow process of letting people in. So not, being interested in other people. And I have it's an aside, but I have I guess you call it a spiritual practice. And I follow a Zen Buddhist sort of idea of meditation. It's meditation in all things. I'm not a Buddhist, but there's some real awesome stuff there. And part of what we do is sit around in what we call Dharma sharing, which is either sharing on a topic or just sharing. We do it in turn. And you share honestly from the heart without forming too much. And the requirement of everyone else is just to deeply listen and to be 100% present with your listening, and not form your own story or the rebuttal or whatever it is. You're not offering advice. You're just really listening. And that process of stopping and totally listening started to get me through as well. It's like, wow, equally, those people on the surface that I found a bit irritating, or like, oh, these aren't my people. It's like, wow, these are so my people. They're, everyone's got their story. And if I could just calm the shit down and just listen and just be present with them, it's an incredible tool. And so that, I think, informed a lot of what I was experiencing at work, and it made it so much more difficult just to not be interested anymore in what was going on for me.
What was the call to that? What drew you into that way of thinking, or that group, or that?
Oh, it was, to be honest, when you got little kids and there's that weird time between Christmas and New Year's, and then those first few, it's sort of like this, what am I supposed to be doing with this time?
The perineum of the year.
Yeah. Yeah, true.
Is that what people are saying, is it?
A few people have, yeah.
Yeah.
When you got a lot of time, and that's in that. I experienced it this year.
The arse adjacent sort of
exactly.
time.
Yeah. Okay. It's not the worst. It's not the worst. It's not the best. But if you really,
and there was an opportunity, because we'd done a few of the festivals and stuff like that, the camping festivals, and then someone suggested, hey, they've just set up this thing in the Coromandel in the bush, and it's sort of like loosely, it's a bit spiritual, but and we just thought we got to try this. And then it's not like a ambush at a Christian camp or anything, but when this Buddhist nun came out in her chocolate brown robe and said the most amazing stuff to my kids, when they're sitting all around with these other kids in the bush in this beautiful hut, and then I started listening to her as well. It was I thought, there's something about this that I think I've got to go back, and I think for Mary and myself, it filled a hole that needed filling. It was sort of like this, that's what we're missing, something like that, something deeper, spiritual, meaningful, with community as well. And so we just kept going back every year, and and now I'm sort of I'm quite enmeshed in that.
We talk about the slow erosion over 22 years, but there was like an end. And you sort of talk in the book about the death of a baby was your final job, suspected thrown across a room during an Xbox session. Was it as simple as like that was too much, or what was the timeline on that actually being your last one?
That was my last one. That was my last on-call period. And I knew it was my last on-call period because several weeks before I had spoken openly initially to Mary about, that I think this is too much. And she had been telling me that for quite a few years. She was much more insightful than I was. And I wholeheartedly agreed with her. And that was after the Trinity Oliver case that appears at the last chapter of the book. And I mentioned it to her, and then I did this weird thing. Like I didn't so much care anymore about the stigma or this idea that I might have had a problem. And I just mentioned it at work, and it sort of made its way up. And then before I knew it, I was off all but my next on-call period. So whatever it was there, I felt this incredible, someone's got my back, but also this complete destruction of everything that I was there for, which is like, holy shit, I can't go to scenes anymore. So I had this real relief, especially Mary was relieved, but then it was like, well, what's the point now? So I had that, and it was a real crisis. So I had that one on-call week, and it was almost like a death. It's like that was the end. I didn't know if I was going to pick it up again, but I went sort of knowing that was potentially my last one ever. And then I went to this scene with this baby death. And because I think that I knew it was all going to be over, that one just became really stark. And I was like a normal member of society going and seeing this terrible event. It was like something had been just lifted off me. And then I thought, yeah, this is right. I shouldn't be doing this anymore, and someone else has got to step up.
There's a few examples that you speak about in the book of sort of memory lapses. I'm not sure if that's the right way to frame it, but you returned to a crime scene and found a marker from a previous investigation and didn't even recognise as it was your own. So you'd been to that house before and had no memory of it. When did you realise that was happening? What was the timeline of that?
Yeah, so this was a domestic homicide in South Auckland. You know, I was going to say going through the motions, but I guess a lot of my scene work is that, you know, sort of there's a very predictable way of going about things. And there was a body with a knife sticking out of it in the hallway. And so I was sort of clearing that area for the body to be removed. And I was checking to see if there was any blood staining that were really critical while the body was there and so on. And I just followed these patterns of blood down the hallway that were actually arterial arcs. So basically the last expulsions from a artery in this case, sort of signifying the last 4 or 5 heartbeats of this poor victim. And I'm always interested in blood that's not consistent with the major patterns that I'm seeing, because those are the ones actually I should also be really interested in. Potentially a perpetrator cut themselves, for example. And I noticed beyond the main area of blood staining, there was a little sticky arrow, and it's got little measurements on it. And those are the little sticky arrows that we use to pinpoint certain blood stains, so they'll show up in photographs, you know, or demarcate the sort of the boundaries of the pattern. And I took a closer look, and it was pointing to a small blood stain that was low down just above the skirting board. And taking another look, it was quite clearly an old blood stain. You know, it started to flake. It was a bit sort of yellowy. And I just thought, holy shit, this is like, these sticky arrows only get used for major incidents and most likely a homicide. So it's obviously an old case with an old examination. And, you know, there's still blood stain there and there's still a sticky arrow. So I had all these ideas around, wow, it's really not on their to-do list to sort of clean up, you know. And that, again, we're talking about the compassion stuff. It's like, wow, maybe it's not on their list for a good reason. You know, there's more shit going on in their lives. And it wasn't until weeks later, I was just, you know, I was reviewing the scene notes before I was going to start writing up the report. And I fed the address into our sort of data system, our sample recovery system. And that particular address came out as a homicide from a few years earlier. But it was one of my own cases. So I'd been in that house. I thought it was bad enough that, you know, you've got multiple serious incidents in the same house. And it's not the only time I've seen that. You know, I've seen that many times. But here, my involvement in that wasn't clear to me at the time. And so I had been in that house investigating a previous homicide a number of years before, and that was a sticky arrow that I had put there. And it was like, I hadn't even clocked that I had been to that house before. That's how many I've seen. That's one issue, how many I've seen. But also, you've pointed to it. Is it a blanking that came as part of a coping mechanism? I don't have the full answer for that.
And the other one that is the Trinity Oliver. Can you tell us about that one? Because that's another one of your memory playing tricks, right?
Yeah, I mean, so this was my penultimate crime scene. And so this was a death of a 16-year-old who had basically been dumped in South Auckland down a sort of end of a cul-de-sac. And this was right during one of our sort of, I think we were at level 3 at that point, but just come out of a lockdown. So, you know, everything's tense anyway. And we're sort of in our, you know, we're worried not only what we're going to see at a scene, but also what we're going to bring back from a scene potentially, especially if it's a domestic and we're like around a lot of people, you know, that paranoia about what COVID was back then. So I'm really sort of guarded. I'm there at the scene alone. I haven't brought a technician with me. And I quickly get on my PPE before the police can sort of come to the back of the truck after I've arrived and for our briefing, just to also protect myself. And yeah, so I'm there in charge of finding any evidence that may have led to this poor girl being dumped on the road and what could point back to an offender. And, you know, I do what I do at the scene. A lot of it was around the body, examining the body, looking for evidence. There wasn't much at all, and that's par for the course with some homicides. You know, there's expectation that you're going to come out with a whole loot bag full of samples, and often doesn't happen. So there's a bit of self-consciousness around that. So like, I really got to find something. So I go, keep going, and there's not much I can do aside from sort of just general documentation and interpretation, and then I leave. And it was sort of one of those quote unquote tragic but unremarkable cases. And ultimately the case was solved by, you know, good old fashioned police work. You know, it's not like forensic science sort of busts every case. The truth is actually quite far from that in many cases. But it wasn't until I was having therapy a lot later, I would say a couple of years after that, maybe at least a year, I was going through a process called EMDR, which was a sort of a revisiting process to some of my most traumatic memories. And for some reason, being with Trinity Oliver was one of those memories. It was just, I could not get that body out of my head. Like I would have dreams where I'd be lying next to her. I'd sort of, you know, I'd be having conversations with her and she'd be telling me what it was all like. And it's really difficult. And it wasn't until I started processing that with the therapist that I realized that actually she hadn't been at the scene with me at all. And I'd been shown a photograph before she'd been taken away by police. And I was examining an empty street. And that was just, you know, the other one was bad in terms of holy crap. But I sort of put it in that box of, because I'm busy, you know, I'm not gonna recall everything. And this one was like, wow, my brain is really doing something to me here, and I think I'm in the right place, sort of working on this stuff. So yeah, there was quite a that was quite intense, that experience.
Because it's PTSD, right? That we are talking about.
Yeah, post-traumatic stress disorder was this keeping that acronym at bay for ages because, you know, I didn't want to be messed up, and but I was to some degree, and sort of irrespective of whether I was messed up or not, it's like what I really became interested in is like, how do I actually process this? Is how do I deal with it? And if getting an acronym sort of helps me with that, you know, and people take a bit more interest, then that's all good.
What were the steps once you had labeled it and started to go there?
Yeah, to find a really, I say a nice therapist, but, you know, every therapist has been great. Everyone's doing their best. Except for one guy, you know, he's in chapter 4, but and he was probably just, you know, institutionalized like the rest of us, or at least I was. So it was actually it was a number of sessions just sitting down and just for the first time, allowing someone to hear me properly, you know, without. I mean, no therapists have been judgmental, but now this almost dedicated space, I need this and it's important. So I started taking it seriously. And that idea of I'm messed up and that's something to be embarrassed about started to dissipate. So it made it easier to sit there and talk about this stuff. But it's the age-old guys, start talking about your shit, man, and get a bit vulnerable and start being interested in why you do the things you do, and you haven't got all the answers and you really need someone to hold your hand through that, because it wasn't about her telling me what I had to do. It was her helping me unload that stuff so I could look at it and go, what do you want to do? You know, I think I expected therapy at some stages to be like, no, they're going to sort it out for me. Sort of the equivalent of, here, take this pill. And it's like, it's so far from that, it's not funny, you know, because nothing's going to stick unless you really do the work. And I kind of also knew my wife would be proud of me because she's a clinical psychologist.
Yeah.
And so that was, in some ways, it's like, it's weird to say that, because why wasn't I more interested when I had someone at home who I knew, one, was interested in me, but two, is interested in everyone else for a living, you know, and has all these skills. So that was a weird place to be in. And so I was revealing stuff about myself in therapy, and then I was sharing it with her, you know, for the first time, a lot of it.
I had been waiting to get to Mary.
Sorry, I busted that out.
No,
this
is the right time. Because
it's a good narrative.
it's a really interesting arc to this as well. As it so happens, she has released a book on the same week that you've released your book. Right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
What's
You
your
got a
book?
little letterboard in the house about copies and sales. And...
I've got more sales.
But she's a clinical psychologist, and you are arguably, well, you are one of the people that needed a clinical psychologist.
The most.
Yeah, the most.
Yeah.
But for years, she didn't know what was really happening with you. So I'm keen to sort of understand how that, what that looked like at home.
Why didn't I tap that resource? Yeah. Well, because Mary, first and foremost, is a wife and a mother. And secondly, she has all her own stuff and a whole life before we get to the clinical psychology aspect. She started studying clinical psychology shortly after we met, and just whizzed her way through it and has become great at what she does. But yeah, so there's been a good 7-year period where she's been in the profession, while I was going through what I was going through. So it's a really valid question, and it's sort of like, well, how did that work exactly? And I just think that, you can't mix being a spouse and a therapist. In any therapy that you guys might have gotten from your loved ones, you realize that there's the real, if we go back to biases and compromising sort of ideas of being compromised, it's like, well, she can't know me that well and not know me, if that makes sense. She needed me. I needed me to do it for me. And so much of what I did for her, thinking I was doing the right thing. You need me to be this, but it was my whole idea of it. I never really engaged with her about, actually, what do you think? How am I screwing up this marriage? All of those questions. I was like, no, that's too scary. I'm going to keep that all in, like everything else. And I needed to step outside of the family to actually get help that I, one, to demonstrate that I have agency here and it's important to me, not just because it's important to you and you're just telling me what I should be doing or being interested in me because it suits you. It's got to suit me. And that's the only way we can get traction, right? And I couldn't have done that with her. I could only have done it with someone, outside of the relationship.
When she does find out the full picture and it all starts to come out, how does that change the marriage?
I don't think there was like a moment where it was the whole picture, I mean, a lot of it made sense to her given what she was observing, and, there were other aspects, like some of the things we've talked about that, my memory blanks and stuff like that probably were surprising to her, and the extent to which I was probably suffering and keeping it all in. It changed the marriage initially, made things a lot harder, because now it was like I was practicing deep avoidance, right? And just not going there with a whole bunch of stuff. And so when it raises its head, that's when the real work starts, because it's like, oh, now we've laid it all on the table. These are my problems. And are we going to get through it? And when we actually start talking about, I don't know if we're going to get through this, and is this going to last? And I now have real questions about whether we're going to be together. That's shocking. Because actually I could have been honest with it myself, and that all existed previously, but now it's all exposed, it's all overt, and I need to demonstrate to me, but I thought initially to her, but to me ultimately, that I was willing to push through this stuff and actually do what I needed to do, because I needed to regularly get help. I needed to converse with her. I needed to be curious about myself, and I really needed to be curious about her, because she's been on the receiving end of a lot, and she's an exceptional woman and incredibly compassionate, and in my curiosity and listening and that whole process, I just felt so much closer to her, and I could really see the hurt that she'd had and that she has, and just that idea of, well, if I want to save this, I've really got to put the work in. And I think it was lovely for her to see me put that work in. Things aren't perfect, but they're so much better. So it's just brought us way closer. there's things now that we talk about that we wouldn't previously ever. And I'm not talking about case details or trauma. I'm talking about how we respond to each other and our process. Yeah.
I've lit up because it's in every person's journey, the journey that you're describing. It just so happens that it's wrapped up in this extraordinary career.
Yeah. That's the background, right? Crime scenes are the background. And it makes it for some people, I hope that it makes it accessible for some people because they want a bit of a hit of something. And maybe there's a subversion there and they get something else as well.
Well, you raise a really interesting point, which you talk about avoidance a lot, which I think is often, and I'm guilty of this, of labeling it resilience.
Oh, totally, yeah.
It's like, I can get through this. You're not. You're just avoiding all of the potential spillover from actually dealing with the thing that's right there.
Yeah, and what is this resilience word anyway? I mean, it seems kind of buzzy, right? There's a lot of time you've just got to. You got to have resilience. You got to do this. You got to do. Tell me how, please. And this is where I can do a plug for Mary's book, Leading with Fierce Compassion. She tells you how. Not how necessarily to be resilient, but how can leadership take on a compassion model? And it's an exceptional piece of work. And it's funny because both of our books do delve quite deeply, ultimately, into compassion. Hers is very much there at the center, but it's one of the themes that's really come out of my book that, it's through my journey of learning a lot of that stuff. With a book that has 3D blood on the cover and has all this sort of, I don't know, what is it going to be, murder forensics and hidden truths? It's like, well, actually, there's some other stuff there too.
I'll tell you what's a good move for a marriage, plugging your wife's book on the podcast. That will go down very well. I did speak to Mary. I had a great chat with Mary. And she said that she was elated when you came off the front line, but it was more complicated for you because you'd built your identity around this work. Being good at it was a coping mechanism in itself. What did it feel like to lose your most effective survival strategy?
It felt really hard. And I felt like a junkie half the time. It's like I was doing a little bit well and then, getting back into suppression. Oh, I don't need to think about it. I don't want to talk about it. All those easy places to be because I didn't have to challenge myself, and I realized why I had that mechanism quite clearly because, in terms of being able to cope with what I was seeing, but it just became a mechanism for everything that was difficult. So when we had difficulty in our relationship, it was like, I just do that same thing. It became a natural path that I would take when I was challenged. And to have that sort of chucked in the air and then having to do the opposite, I kept judging myself on not doing it well as well. So, now I suck at being curious because I'm not being curious enough, or I fall back into suppression and avoidance. So therefore I could beat myself up a bit more. And it became very sort of always about me, It's sort of like, well, now I am sucking, or now I'm doing well. Aren't I doing well? All that sort of crap that I think a lot of guys do. Look, I've emptied the dishwasher. Congratulate me, And so I had to get out of that as well. But it was really difficult. And I just had to have more time being in that mode of curiosity and exploration than I had to have out before I could. What I built up was this physical sense of when I was avoiding, my stomach would actually start knotting. I was a bit of a choke feel, and there's no better way to be interested in what's going on for you than if your body's going, hey, you really need to take notice here. So really difficult and incredibly gratifying. That's what it felt like.
Mary's been incredibly giving in terms of painting a picture, but there's also an element, I wonder whether there's a concern about becoming a poster boy almost for mental health, because it's not a pioneering journey that you're talking about as owning your stuff and talking about it. Lots of people have done it before, but I guess, do you have any feelings around that?
Yeah, I do. The nature of a lot of, I think that's the risk maybe with having written a book that's not just, forensic stories. That for me, it was important to go deeper than that and, not just give my reckons on other people's journeys, but go quite deep with my own journey. And I think I'm a bit self-conscious about sort of this idea of becoming the mental health guy through what I've been quite honest and a bit raw with. And, and when guys maybe particularly step up and go, yeah, no, I struggled with this and I'm being honest about it, is the other stuff sort of forgotten, that there are a whole bunch of other elements. And it's an important element, but, I'm more than my mental health and I can still be very functional and I can contribute a lot. And so a lot of it's my anxiety about it, that did I want to say this? Should I have said it? But I also want to just be clear around that particularly the job, being a forensic scientist is still really important to me. And just because I've struggled with, some really grisly aspects of the job, it doesn't mean that I, don't do well as a professional and can, as I said, contribute. So yeah, it's a sort of a slightly murky area where I'm, it's just the first stages of this. But, I don't think I would have written the book differently, even if I'd known that I was going to have these responses from people. So, yeah, it's just something, again, I need to be curious about and point out.
Do you feel like in this conversation that has gone that way? Like I'm thinking about how we approached it, right? Like you've got two incredibly interesting stories, and there's the forensic science, and then there's the human and the mental toll. And perhaps we have drifted more towards that because I think from our perspective, it was, I guess, more, I don't know, more relatable, more interesting. But when I'm thinking, I mean, this is a really good example, right, of how we approached this interview. Do you think, would you have liked to have spoken more about the science?
I think the approach to the interview and where we've gone is probably a very natural one because for me, it's actually the more interesting topic in some ways. I will always be interested in forensic science, but this for me is do I think it's important for people to know? Probably to some degree, but it was important for me to process and go through. I think most people who have read the book, it's where the focus has gone. And it doesn't necessarily take up the majority of the book. It actually takes up a minority of the book, but maybe it's what people are left with. And so you could argue, oh, well, I did a good job with it then because it's a small part, but it actually stays with you and it forms discussion. I don't probably know that it could have gone somewhere else, but I've also prepped myself over the last few weeks through the book coming out. Like, how can I segue stuff from the mental health back to the profession? And then I get stuck every time because the profession is not now for me able to be divorced from the mental health side. So yeah, I'm probably trying to argue something that that isn't possible to sort of get out of. Otherwise, it's going to become quite clinical, and the things that I actually probably should have, explored more will just be sort of pushed aside again. So it's probably not honest.
This book isn't just for, it's going to help people, but it's not just going to help forensic scientists. You sort of speak in it about all of the people at these crime scenes that are experiencing this and going through it. And you're someone who's speaking about it publicly and the effect it's had on you. But what can be done better? Because it is quite a lonely, isolating job and role, across, I don't know, broaden it out to as wide as you want to go. How can things improve?
Ambulance, police, fire, and there's a lot of people, and I touch on a couple of them, at the front lines, and they get no acknowledgement. They're not even considered. This isn't a profession that I can identify with the front lines. But there's lots of people, and then there's all the vicarious stuff for people who are in supporting roles and stuff. But you said it exactly. It's very isolating. So what can we do to not make it isolating? It's like, well, we can have a normalization of this stuff, and I did it to myself. And I'm assuming that a lot of people around me were also doing it to themselves, in terms of, we got this, man. We're scientists.
I did want to ask, I'm sorry to jump in on your point, but you work as a team. with lots of different moving parts. So the assumption would be, on my side, naively, that you would have a debrief and you would sit down and talk about that sort of stuff. But is it that isolation element which is the crux of this problem?
Yeah, I think so. And don't forget that we went to university and studied science, you know, and what did I say about biology? Because I liked animals, you know, so it's yes. And then it was like, oh no, I want to go to crime scenes because I like the idea of being a detective and I can use science with that. But what's actually prepping me for that body? You know, it's so I go through an interview that, you know, tests a whole bunch of stuff. But, you know, a master's degree in forensic science is one thing. I would say equally important is being geared up with tools so you can actually deal with what you're going to encounter. And you can be, you can know that, oh, this is happening for me right now. What's going on there? Let's be interested in that. And I don't think any industry would do that. But that's, I think, where I would have needed to get to actually be fully prepared for what I was going to see. So, you know, you talk about team culture and leadership. I think those are key for any industry. And the research is really showing that, you know, if a team leader embodies the things that their guidance spouts, which is, you know, you gotta go for this, you gotta look after yourself there. If they do it themselves and they're open to conversations around it, then you know, burnout rates go down. Active engagement with help goes way up, and if team leaders do the opposite, then the opposite happens. So leadership is huge. Being able to have that conversation with your staff or set up an environment where it's just normal. Like if, as a leader, if you show that you're fallible or you struggle with things or whatever it is, it's like, wow, I want to be like that guy, you know, because suddenly it's okay. And equally with team members, if those people who are seeing the same things as each other all the time aren't talking about anything beyond the science or the physical attributes you need to drag a body out of a burning building, or, you know, how do I help and how do I protect and serve, you know, and there's humanity under all of that, and it affects us in different ways, and everyone is different. But if people are more prepared to talk about it more openly, I mean, I think those two are the key things, especially when you've got cumulative exposure and emotional suppression. You know, it's kind of like a hot pot for bad outcomes.
You talk about humanity as well, and you have been to a number of situations that are very difficult to understand about humanity. But what have you learned that society can take away from, I guess, crime and the areas that you operated in professionally?
Yeah, it's a big question. Well, one, you know, we go back to the compassion idea, and that my finding, not scientific finding, but my emotional finding is that we're all really quite similar, and that when it comes down to it, those who commit crime are pretty ordinary, and it doesn't always make for the most interesting crimes, but we're responding. Ordinary people are responding to absurd, weird, or extraordinary events that are going on around them, and they're woefully limited in their resource. Or it's there's very very little premeditated crime in New Zealand or anywhere. You know, it's the donk on the head of a drunk mate, you know, because you have some grievance with them, and then it's like, holy crap, what do I do? And people respond then in stressful ways. So that idea of it's all quite ordinary, you know, and what I sort of argue against in this book is like, let's be interested in those stories that sit underneath that, you know, what led to this person behaving in that way is quite is really stark. You know, the crime scene is the end of that process. Let's rewind that and like keep rewinding it. And these cycles of poverty, you know, the things that actually lead to certain crimes occurring is this, you know, this gross inequality that we have, the addiction, gang membership, you know, all these things that actually it's disenfranchised people living in circumstances that where they don't understand anything else. So, and then you have the occasional one that comes along, like you've mentioned them, the Grace Millenes and the Polkinghorns and all that sort of stuff. These are the exceptions. This is not normal true crime. So can we be more engaged with the humans and the victims and the victims' families? That seems quite natural. And I'm arguing for the investigators and their families, but also the perpetrators and their families. And we can sort of maybe understand some of their stories and where the resources need to go in much earlier. And particularly when we look at domestic crime, some man on woman sort of murders, and where they occur and why they occur, and what resources are going to equip these families to actually deal with the stresses that they're facing day in, day out.
You mentioned a line earlier which is related to this, like you're not just the worst thing you've done, right? Like how important is that for people to understand?
It's important to understand, but it's also probably really hard to understand. It's again, we come to othering and sort of evil people do evil stuff, and I don't have to worry about it. It is one, I mentioned it in the book, and one of the really negative therapeutic experiences I had was when it was relatively early on, I was playing around with this idea because I had kids, and when they were quite young, I started seeing these familiar items, we've touched on it before, in crime scenes. And it made me feel, oh shit, these guys really aren't that different to me. And, it's this subtle change or maybe overt change in their living conditions that may have led to what they've done. And so when you go a bit deeper into the story, it's much easier to start developing a little bit of compassion. And I was frustrated as hell when I had little kids, and you're so sleep deprived, and what you want to do is just get through a night, and so an Xbox gaming session that gets interrupted by your sick baby on the surface feels incredibly hard to have any compassion for, murdering that child. But when I've touched into it myself and my own frustrations, can I find some understanding and even compassion for the guy who's in that position, who actually reacts in that way to a sick child? At times I've been able to, and at times I haven't. But what I bring out of it is the vast majority of the time, these people are operating within their resources. And there's a lot more we could do to prop people up and to give them the resources that they need. And I would say in almost every single case that I've looked at, every homicide case, I would say those men and women who have committed those cases are not just the worst thing that they've done. Yeah.
Your kids are both adult now.
18 and 20, yeah.
Have they read this?
Yeah, my daughter went through it real quick, and what was her comment? Oh, it's a real easy read. And it's like, yeah, I think she meant that it was, that, to be fair, she said it's very readable.
Yeah.
And I took that as a massive compliment, because given the material, it's like the fact that you can read it quite easily, she said. I thought that was fantastic. My son has read most of it, and you're wondering what they said feedback-wise?
I'm wondering if they realised the dual operation that you were running as a dad
The dual operation.
and in your work and what you were really dealing with. Because I imagine you haven't spoken to them directly about some of the things that you have seen.
No, absolutely not.
So they are reading about it for the first time.
They will be reading some of this for the first time. I think there was enough sort of exposure that they sort of absorbed the idea of what I was doing over the years. So this idea of blood and guts and death, and that Dad does that sort of stuff. So I think as they got older and older, they haven't really had a moment where they've gone, what did you actually do? because then they started seeing me on the news when they were older, and they started asking more questions. And I think they've just taken it on. So this book hasn't surprised them. My daughter did say, on reading particularly the last chapter, that which is probably it's a weird word to say, but my favorite chapter of the book, that she got quite emotional reading it, and that makes me glad in a way, because it's not easy stuff to read about your dad, but I took that as a compliment that I had sort of achieved a version of what I wanted to do, and it's initiated other conversation, which is great. And I hope that I had that with my son as well, that, there can be more that comes out of this, rather than, because some people have been stunned and like, I can't believe that you were actually dealing with this stuff through the time I've known you. And I can't imagine what I would be experiencing if I read my dad's book and it was this sort of material. But I have to say, I think an element of it has just been normalized for them. Yeah.
Does that scare you in any way?
A little. I think my kids included, I think we're all really desensitized to this stuff. It's, I go back to the sort of, we like a bit of murder, but we're not really that happy about death. But I think as a society, you talked about other societal observations. It blows me away how easily we can process surface level violence, in these swipeable headlines and titillating details. And once it goes past a certain point, then it's like, no, I'm not really interested in that. And we have the choice now on our phones to not be interested in that. We don't have to go any deeper than we actually want to. And lots of the reporting, I would say, doesn't go particularly deep. It is reporting. It's not journalism. It's information. And what do I do with this information? Well, so-and-so has been stabbed X number of times and has been left on the side of the road. Story finished. It's like, okay, so what do I do with that in my life? That's great that I know that, but it seems like it still fulfills somebody's idea of stuff I need to be hit with. And that's a bit disturbing to me. And as a kid and as a teenager, I just sucked up, violent films from the 90s and thought, yeah, this is great. What's violent now, which seems like way worse, and I used to believe, fictional violence doesn't influence real violence, but how can it not? How can one's exposure to violence that you see on your screens not actually make you more blasé about violence that like real violence? Doesn't make sense to me.
Because I was interested whether writing a book like that feeds the beast because of the salacious details that are in there. But even through the having listened to the book and then having the conversation with you now, I've got a deeper appreciation for what you're actually trying to do here in terms of the message that the reader would end up with.
You can't be shocked by the violence in the book if I had just gone cool science stories.
Yeah.
You can't, right?
Exactly.
You could go, oh, wow, that's fascinating. And, to be fair, there's blood and guts in there and there's plot in there. There are twists, there are turns, there are like science broke the case. All of that's in there. But I don't think I could have, like my wife asked me, sort of, would you have written the same book with what you know now? I think I couldn't have done a different book because this is the honest book, and yeah, can I put we're a bit post-truth now, so can I put some of the real back into true crime and make people just think a little bit? Just like, what is this headline saying to me and where should my interests go? I think I would love for that to come out of the book.
Because I don't know whether this is age and stage for me, but I definitely find myself thinking about the humanity and the story behind being on the receiving end of one of these situations or what the family is thinking. So it's definitely thought-provoking in that context.
It's the point, right? I mean, I try to do a whole chunk of show in there and not too much tell because it's the experience. You're following my journey through this world and, am I relatable in that sense? I'd like to think I probably was. And with all of my struggles. And I think it makes the crime scenes worse. You know, it makes what I'm seeing worse. And it should be worse than what you read in the news.
I want to get to what you're doing currently and how you're thinking about the future, but I've got a few quick questions to get through.
Sure.
So TV, are there any crime tropes you regularly see in TV shows that piss you off or annoy you?
Oh, the biggest one is probably, we need to do everything for atmosphere and make it sort of like, aren't we cool in this scenario? So, they end up going to crime scenes at night and doing all their laboratory examinations at night as well. And they're not even a well-lit lab. It's just this little pencil torch and they sort of, dudes, what are you doing? And, in New Zealand, we as I said, we wait till, unless it's an emergency, we wait till daytime to do our examination so we can see things.
Yeah, makes sense.
Nothing's quite as good as daylight.
Only ever gloves and things over shoes too. Like never full PPE.
Yeah. It's just a little, because I might pick up a pen or something, or use my pen to pick, move something around. But the major one beyond everything, and it's whether you watch Shetland, and it's a classy sort of UK one, or you watch CSI or whatever. These people are not only doing the job of several experts. So, they're interviewing victims, they're hot on the trail of the killer, and then they're in the lab. I mean, who does this role? Not even the FBI or the CIA. You don't have individuals that do that. And the problem with that is that if you're interviewing a victim and then you're looking for evidence, you're doing the worst type of biasing yourself, right? Oh shit, this is a terrible crime, and I've really formed an emotional attachment to this victim, and now I'm going to find evidence that supports what she or he says. It's really dodgy territory. But not only that, but they become involved in the crime themselves sometimes. It's like some retribution thing, or they're stitched up somehow, and they're made out to be the perpetrator when they're quite clearly not, and that's all going to be resolved. Dexter style. Yeah, Dexter. I mean, I talk about Dexter briefly in the book, and Dexter's interesting because he sort of was doing something that, maybe every forensic scientist sort of thinks they might want to dabble in a little bit, which is reliable science. To bring reliable science into what I do, which is crime scene reconstruction, is not easy. It's when you're based in an analytical lab, you can have your standards, you can have all sorts of things that make what you're doing valid. With crime scene science, it's because I might have a mannequin with a blood-soaked sponge attached to its head, and I'm whacking it with a baseball bat to see if my anticipation of one of the mechanisms actually is what I was sort of seeing, and then I have to recreate that with many different instruments, mechanisms, motions, just to be scientific about it, and do it in triplicate and all sorts of things. But Dexter got around a lot of that by actually by using human subjects, in his slightly more dodgy half. And so, you could take a human subject with human skin, with human flesh, with human blood, and that's the most reliable scientific experiment, right? So I'd like to think that we wouldn't go there, but there's a little bit about it, like, this is reliable science rather than what we do with pig blood and mock-ups. So that was interesting. But I would say the bias that they have and the atmosphere and the none of us are good looking as well. I don't know. Thanks, guys. But I mean, the glamour behind it and the speed, obviously. Speed is incredible, and the neat resolutions. There are way too many shades of grey in reality, and it's so black and white on TV. You did it, conclusive, send them away, done.
Yeah. The speed thing did surprise me in the book about how long from crime scene to courtroom.
Yeah, sometimes 3, 4, even 5 years. Yeah, there's a long process, and things change. Re-examination, new hypotheses, all that sort of stuff.
These ones are tough on the spot, so you take a minute if you need one. What's something you now notice at home that you didn't before?
I think it's the little bits of black mold that start in the, on the silicon.
Oh, the shower.
Shower and the bath and all that sort of stuff.
How do you get rid of them?
You don't. You have to rip the silicon off and start again.
My eye just lit up when you,
Yeah, so I've been in bathrooms where, you don't see any silicon or walls anymore because it's just mold.
Right.
And I don't know if anyone's taking a shower anymore. It's more like a storage area. So just the way that people live is sort of like, sometimes I just have to go home and go, I recognize a spot of mold in my place that's like that mold. So I have to get rid of that mold because it's about keeping things separate, right? Keeping worlds apart. Mold would be definitely one of those little bits of grime that you recognize that for me give back a memory of some nefarious deed. Yeah.
What does Mary say about how you've changed that you agree with?
She would say that I am far more engaged with my own process, more curious about her, and put our relationship first, and initiate. So I'm demonstrating that I'm thinking about her and us, and put into action things that are going to create experiences, not just half-assed suggestions that someone else hopefully will take care of.
That's the answer of a man who's done the work.
That is one of the all-time great answers.
That is a great answer. I would challenge anyone to be able to answer that question as well.
Here's an easy one. Does the evidence ever lie?
Only scientists that haven't understood the evidence can make it lie. Does that make sense?
I'm not a scientist.
So evidence on itself doesn't really mean anything without context and interpretation. So if evidence isn't properly translated or explained, then it can be incredibly misleading. So an example would be, do you want an example?
Yeah.
So your DNA your flesh under the fingernails, which everyone likes to talk about.
Defense.
Yeah. I mean, to actually get flesh under the fingernails would be a bloody amazing act. And to still have it under there days later when you finally get examined, that's forensic attention to detail from an otherwise traumatized victim. So in a domestic situation, flesh under the fingernails, one, you can't really identify flesh unless you've really gouged chunks out. So what you got is a DNA profile from underneath fingernails. And what we don't know is how they got there. So if it's presented in court, so your DNA was found under
Stevens.
Stevens' DNA was found under your fingernails. So therefore, Stephen must have been the one who assaulted you, right? Or tried to sexually assault you, whatever it is.
Wouldn't have done that.
And that can often just be left at that. So, the evidence doesn't lie, right? Well, the evidence isn't being challenged in the sense that the evidence could also mean that you guys live in a domestic situation.
We don't.
But you could.
Your Honour.
Maybe the evidence is saying otherwise. So if there's any domestic, I mean, we could
have shook hands.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you guys spending time here together. So you've just been fondling the three-dimensional nature of that blood stain. And I think
on the book,
on the cover of the book, and you've done the same thing. So it's quite possible that Steve has left his DNA behind, and you've picked it up under your fingernails.
One of the unfortunate things about working in this environment is his DNA is everywhere.
It's everywhere. So think about DNA like paint. Everyone's got their own paint, and they're covered in it. Some of it's dry, some of it's wet, and you're putting your paint down wherever you touch. But you're also picking up some other people's paint who have touched those surfaces before. So it's just this.
Some of us keep our paint.
Yeah. Some of us do. Some of us really try. Some of us try our best. Yeah.
Some of us keep our paint in the tin. Okay, so the evidence can lie.
The evidence can absolutely lie.
Has Mary ever used her psychology training on you mid-argument, and did it work?
No, I mean, Mary has a very good way of reflecting things back to me. As sort of like a paraphrasing or putting it in a slightly different light to show me what I'm actually saying. And that she does exceptionally well. And I'm sure she does that with her clients. It's basically, holding a mirror up in a way that you can understand, you dummy. Sorry, that's about me. That's not about her clients. Just really want to emphasize that.
I do the same thing to Shay.
Yeah. And, I have a very limited knowledge of what Mary actually does in her day-to-day because she has the same sensitivities and confidentiality that I do. So we don't actually talk about details. But I imagine that's a natural skill that she has that's been honed by her incredible skills that she's developed in her profession. I also do something back to her, which is a sort of a lawyerly a concentration on details that's far less compassionate and helpful than her strategy, because that's all about being right. And I think scientists like that stuff, and I'm really trying to erode that behavior.
Ruben, thanks so much for coming in, and I've found the whole thing just incredibly fascinating. It's a new subject area for me, and we're really lucky with what we've created here. We had Brad Thorne on, and then our headmaster and a forensic scientist. So we kind of we canvass so many different parts of society, and this has been just incredibly interesting to me. But yeah, I just applaud your just your openness with everything, right? There's two things here. There's the forensic science, and then there's the human element. And you are so good at articulating what you've felt and what you've gone through, and it's just been brilliant. So yeah, thank you so much. The book is out now. The Blood Says Otherwise. Get it at all good bookstores. And there's a huge future for you in speaking and, getting this message out to more people. So thank you so much.
On first reading, I found it really confronting. I really, really did. And I couldn't get past the crime scenes that you described. But then on deeper reflection, and after hearing you speak today, I understand a little bit better, I think, the message that certainly I take away from it around humanity and compassion and understanding the circumstances beyond what you just see. So I think from that regard, I hope a lot of people aren't put off perhaps by the subject matter in the first instance and do decide to delve a little bit deeper and to get that same introspection and understanding as you have through your own journey, which is awesome. Yeah,
thank you. I hope so too. I hope that that's exactly how it goes with the book. That maybe we can, there's one little thing, like when I had a commissioning editor from HarperCollins, my original title for the book was My Life of Crime, What Dealing with Death Taught Me About Life. And that title really quickly disappeared. They didn't really mention why, but I imagine it was something like, you're not writing a bloody thesis here, We do want to get attention. And The Blood Says Otherwise has actually taken on quite a lot of meaning for me, that title. But it is a little bit like that, everything that you want in true crime is in the book. And hopefully there's a touch more that, will change the way that you think about crime, criminals, and maybe a little bit of humanity. I think that would be amazing. I really appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much.
Cheers, Ruben.